Thanks for downloading Analysis. Today we have a glimpse into a political future, an intensely relaxed future. Well, perhaps. Here's Sonia Sodha, and she's taking it easy.
But now it's strictly blues versus reds.
OK, TV's on, cushions plumped up, crisps at the ready. And even better, the government's paying me to couch surf, whether I look for a job or not. Or it could be, what if we had a new right? The right to be lazy. Everyone would get paid something, regardless of how much or how little work we did. Whether you like that idea or are horrified by it sounds a bit bizarre, doesn't it? Yet the idea behind this vision is flavour of the month amongst the policy wonks.
If you look at the history of the labour movement, the very first thing that the labour movement tried to do was to reduce the working week. It tried to get rid of work. So I think it's a return to the very original impetus of the labour movement.
Do you think people have got a right to be idle? Is that something that you would stand by?
I would. I think it would be an immense testament to society if we could all be lazy.
So you'd like to see a world where we were all lazy 24/7? You think that would be a sign of social progress?
If we all had the possibility to be lazy and didn't have to work, yeah, it'd be amazing.
Interesting. That's Nick Cernick, a lecturer at City University in London and co-author of a book called Reinventing the Future. He's a proponent of something he believes could help us make the most of a brave new world in which robots do much of the work. It's called the Universal Basic Income, and it's what this programme is all about.
What we're talking about realistically is a reduction in the amount of work that people have to do and that society has to do. As a first step, we could have an extra weekend day, take Fridays off.
And see why that might be quite popular.
Yeah, exactly. I think everybody could get behind that. So that could be a first step. And progressively, as we get more and more robots and more automation, we can start to reduce work even more and more.
I'm Sonia Sodha, and my work is as chief leader writer at The Observer, and I used to be a Labour Party policy wonk. Back when I was in think tanks, the prospect of an unconditional income paid to every citizen by the government was seen as a utopian daydream. But now it's gaining serious traction on the left. I want to know why. One of those who admits he's tempted by the policy is my old boss, former leader of the Labour Party, Ed Miliband.
I think the universal basic income is an admirable idea because it thinks big about our society. It says we want to give people much greater freedom in their lives, much greater freedom to learn, to care for others, to work as well. But it provides a platform for people from which they can build and make their own choices. And after all, if you're affluent in today's society, lots of choices are open to you. If you're struggling on a low income, your choice is much more constrained. So the attraction of UBI is it's sort of equal freedom, if you like.
So it sounds like you think it should be something that the Labour Party should be thinking about adopting?
I think it's got attractions, but I think there's a lot of work to do on it. I'd put myself in the category of somebody willing to be convinced. But there are obstacles.
As you might imagine, plenty of those obstacles are practical. How much money would we all get? Could it discourage people from working? Would it be taxed? And how on earth would we pay for it? But that's not what we'll be looking at in this programme. What I'm interested in is why a policy that some associate with the end of work is starting to win support in the Labour Party. Does it offer a way forward for the left? Or is it just a distraction from the real fight, the struggle for the improvement of working people's lives? First, let's look at where the idea came from. So this is where I first heard about the idea of a basic income. I've come back to Oxford to talk to my old politics tutor, Stuart White, who's been teaching students about the idea for 25 years.
It's often attributed to Thomas Paine, writing in the late 18th century, and he is a radical democratic revolutionary, a key figure in the American Revolution, French Revolution, and a major opponent of the British establishment, so very much on the left. But he also argued that there was a very significant role for private ownership, and he thought a condition for a just economic system is that everybody should have a share in inherited assets. There are certain kinds of wealth that as a society we inherit, for example, natural resources. And his particular proposal was that we share this out as a capital grant, which everybody would get in early adulthood. But then later in the 19th century, people started to argue that we should share this particular kind of wealth out in the form of a regular income payment.
And was it quite a radical idea at the time?
Yes, in the course of the 19th century, you get both liberal and socialist thinkers who pick up on the idea of basic income, and it's often linked back to this idea of people having a right to a share of these inherited assets, in particular natural resources.
But while its philosophical roots stretch back down the centuries, only one political party has championed the idea of a basic income here in Britain, the Green Party. It's been their policy for more than 30 years. Caroline Lucas, the Green Party's sole MP, says it's a no-brainer for people who care about the planet.
We're getting away from the idea that the only way to run an economy is through more and more production of stuff. We know that more and more input of natural resources and output of waste is what is driving unsustainability. So if we're able to look at employing people's creativity and imagination in a whole range of ways that are not necessarily just about producing stuff and with all of the environmental consequences that goes along with that, then I think we can get away from an economy that is only about growth, and we can come to a more stable economy over time, a more dynamic one, if you like, that is based on quality of development rather than increase of growth.
And do you think there are particular benefits for women?
I think women would benefit hugely from a basic income, because it is still the case that women are more likely to be the ones who are taking on caring responsibilities, whether that's for children or for elderly relatives and so on. And again, I think that this is a way of recognising the value of that work.
Are you surprised that after all these years of supporting the idea, it suddenly seems to become quite zeitgeisty?
I am surprised with the speed with which that's happened. I mean, it wasn't very long ago, the general election of last year, when the Greens were standing on this policy and being given, quite a hard time. And in a year since then, we've seen a plethora of reports from think tanks. We've seen some U-turns from some politicians who were deeply sceptical of it just a year ago. So that's what gives me hope, in a sense, that perhaps we are now absolutely hitting the right time, and momentum behind this idea will grow.
How did this niche policy make the leap from the seminar room to the mainstream? Part of the answer lies in the way technology is changing the world of work. Over the past few decades, machines and computers have increasingly replaced so-called routine jobs in workplaces like factories and banks, and that has increased wage inequality. Now the robots have the accountants and lawyers in their sights. Growing numbers of us are likely to feel the white heat of technology.
As we have more automation, as we have these large technology companies that are reaping the benefits of this automation, we face a real danger not of being able to tackle inequality, but inequality getting significantly worse. And the question is, who is going to get the proceeds, the fruits of this greater productivity?
For Ed Miliband, there's a big question about whether the welfare state can continue to address this inequality gap.
I think we've got here because we've had a changing world of work, and as far as the welfare state is concerned, it's struggled to keep up. We've got a welfare state that still feels like it's designed for a world of full-time work, often by men, not a world of changing work, of greater insecurity, of people doing more than one job. It's a very, very binary, old-fashioned 20th century system in what feels like a significantly changing world of work.
That 20th century welfare system was based on the idea of contribution. People pay into the system when they're in work and receive benefits when they lose their job to tide them over while they're looking for a new one. But over time, that link has been eroded. To shore up public support for the system, politicians have become tougher on people receiving unemployment benefits. Anthony Painter is a director at the Royal Society of Arts and another advocate of a universal basic income.
We've built up this whole architecture of a welfare state, which is designed to encourage people to act in a certain way, but it gives enormous discretion to people who are on low wages or out of work interface with. And so in 2014, 20% of job seekers received a sanction. Right. So a sanction can come about because you happen to miss the bus, so you're late for an appointment. It can be a family crisis emerged, so you had to deal with that rather than meeting with an advisor. You lose some money. You end up in a food bank. Over 1 million emergency food parcels were given out by the Trussell Trust in the same year. And so once you start to pull on the strings of the system, you end up with this whole architecture of interference, which actually doesn't enable people to fundamentally get out of this low pay, low security environment in which they're in.
Painter thinks a guaranteed income paid to everyone at just under £4,000 a year could be the answer. It would replace many means-tested benefits and act as a buffer against the uncertainty of an increasingly insecure labour market, where part-time work, self-employment and zero-hours contracts are more common.
The basic income gives people some support and a bit of security to try out things. Right? Now, they might use it to support their income in work, they might use it to help them support their family, they might use it to support some volunteering in a local community. Equally, they might use it to support their income while they're trying out a new business idea. They might use it, particularly young people who are looking to access to the professions and opportunity, they might use it to support an internship. And an internship could set them on a completely different pathway of opportunity. It has all these qualities that I think are quite important in accessing and opening access to opportunity.
So, a thumbs up from a pragmatic policy wonk. But how might this go down in the real world? Becca Kirkpatrick is a trade unionist, chair of the West Midlands community branch of Unison. She says she meets a lot of people in insecure jobs who believe their lives would be improved by a single guaranteed payment.
One example, my own partner works as a tarmacer, and he's one of those people who has been told that he has to register himself as self-employed by his boss. He's not self-employed, he works for this one guy, he can't hire anyone else in to do his job. But because of that, he has no sick pay, he has no holiday pay, he has no pension. There's other guys working alongside him doing the exact same job, and they are on the books and they get all these benefits. So Daz works extremely hard, literally back-breaking labour, day in, day out, whatever the weather is. And he'd actually probably much rather be doing something else. He volunteers in the evenings, he's an amateur boxing coach, and he has a whole bunch of skills which he could quite easily retrain to do some different work, but just right now that's not even an option. He has no choice to do that.
And what's holding him back?
The need to pay the bills. He has to keep his job. He doesn't currently have those qualifications to make a change in line of work that he does at the moment. So, like most people, if you don't work, then, you're left with nothing. And with a basic income, it's going to give people just that breathing space.
It's not just Becca's partner Daz who likes the idea. Her local union branch has backed it, and it's got the seal of approval from the National GMB Union too. Perhaps a recognition of the limits of trade union power in the modern workplace. Not so, says Cernick. In fact, he thinks a basic income could put power back into the workers' hands by giving them an important new freedom, the freedom to turn down work.
I think this is one of the most interesting aspects of a UBI is that it does change the power dynamics. So it's often sort of represented as an economic thing. But at the same time, by providing a sort of backstop for anybody who's in a particular state, it enables them to turn down jobs that are demeaning, that are stressful. Suddenly, the worker has the choice to be able to say, well, I don't want to take this job. And in fact, I don't have to.
Cernick even believes that a universal basic income could reprice certain kinds of labour.
Some of the worst jobs in society that also tend to be very low paid, they'll have to be paid more to get people to do them. And I think this just recognizes the fact that they are socially necessary, but not necessarily pleasant jobs. On the other hand, jobs which pay a lot but are fairly nice to do would probably be paid less because you would have lots of people suddenly trying to get those jobs. And you could sort of see the oversupply of labor bringing down wages in those areas.
What kind of jobs are you talking about there?
In terms of the sort of low-wage jobs, things like cleaners, things like people driving garbage trucks, people doing janitorial work, all of this sort of stuff, which is incredibly socially necessary, but right now is very poorly paid.
Power to the binman! Economists might find this idea rather utopian. Cernick seems to have forgotten that pay is determined not just by how much people want to do a job, but also whether they've got the skills to do it. Maybe soon robots will have those skills. Far from bemoaning that prospect, Cernick thinks we should embrace the march of the robots. He thinks then we could all do less work so that jobs are shared out more fairly.
This was the original driver for the labour movement, was reduced working week, but also the same pay. Now, there's some interesting economic studies which show that when people work less, they actually improve their productivity. So they can do the same amount of work in less time. I think if people were forced into a 4-day working week, they'd be much more productive.
You said forced. Do you think government should be legislating for this?
I think it's absolutely necessary the government has to legislate for it.
So just to think about how this would work for me, you're saying that government should legislate and tell my employer that they can only ask me to work a maximum of 4 days a week, but they still have to pay me the same amount of money. Is that what you're arguing for?
Yes.
Great. Where do I sign up?
I'm going to start a political party. We'll get this going.
My membership form's in the post. But it's not just lefties like Nick Cernick who might be considered joining a universal basic income party. There could even be takers on the radical libertarian right.
Even though overall people are getting better off, some people aren't. So I think the basic income is a really good way of solving that problem. It allows us to improve the average standard of living, but also compensate the people who lose out.
This is Sam Bowman, director of the Adam Smith Institute, a leading libertarian think tank which embraces the free market.
I think a lot of the developments in the UK economy and in the global economy are very positive overall. They raise the average standard of living, both in poor countries that are globalising and actually in the UK as we trade more with the rest of the world. But they don't always raise the standard of living for people at the bottom. There can be periods of time, maybe they're just transitional periods, where jobs have been eliminated but we haven't come up with new things for example, steel workers to do. It may be that the jobs that used to exist will never be replaced by better jobs.
So you think we just have to accept the fact that in the modern world there aren't going to be enough decently paid jobs for people?
Yeah, I think that we do have to accept that. And it's not just blue-collar jobs, white-collar jobs, legal jobs are being destroyed at a very rapid rate by automation and by computerization. We will probably think of things for those people to do, but it's not going to happen overnight. And the transition period, it could be a year, it could be 10 years. I've heard this expression that, automation and globalization are like going to Australia. It's fantastic once you get there, but the journey can be really, really difficult. If we are indeed going through that journey now, and if we are seeing steel jobs being destroyed, maybe in 10 years, maybe in 5 years, we'll think of new things for those people to do. Maybe we won't. We need a welfare system that is robust to the worst case scenario.
So even Bowman, who firmly believes in the free market, admits it can't provide for everyone and that to compensate, we need a new kind of welfare state.
We have a 60-year-old welfare system designed for a world where a job is enough to live decently. We no longer live in that world for many people. The welfare system we've got is like a very, very badly tarmacked road. Every time we've had a pothole, we've just covered it up. We've never sat down and said, okay, this is the 21st century. What we need is a welfare system that supports people throughout their lives if they're on low incomes, if they have skills that aren't marketable, if they haven't been lucky enough to be really good at being bankers or be really good at being lawyers or whatever. Just because you've been unlucky in the circumstances of your birth doesn't mean that you shouldn't be able to live decently.
A view that might bring a smile to the face of Daz, the casual tarmacker we heard about earlier. So we have a radical leftist, a pragmatic think tanker, trade unionist, and now even a die-hard libertarian, all backing a new approach to welfare. This is looking like an idea with broad electoral appeal. Nick Pearce, who spent over a decade running one of the leading think tanks on the left, isn't so sure.
I think welfare states succeed best when they feel close to us as shared institutions that we live together in and we can visibly see our cooperation and reciprocity in.
And what do you mean by reciprocity?
The sense that you have contributed something, you are cooperating with others, not free-riding on their efforts. There's a very, very strong sense, if you look at the academic research, that human beings want to cooperate with each other, to reciprocate with each other, to punish those who they don't think are reciprocating. They don't just take, but they don't just give unconditionally.
You can see the point. Why should you go to work and pay your taxes in order to fund a basic income for someone who just sits around watching telly and munching crisps all day? Salt and vinegar. I put this to Anthony Painter of the RSA. Wouldn't an unconditional basic income undermine the very foundation of the welfare state, the idea that we're all in it together?
Solidarity is important, contribution is important, and basic income supports both of those ideas. Because what basic income does, in essence, is it gives you that foundation to invest in your life, to try new things, to be creative. And that enables you then to make a greater contribution. You put trust in people first in order to enable them to put in. So the contribution comes later. So it flips it. And I think that's what people initially can be uncomfortable with.
That seems, to me, a big leap for people to make. And there's another objection. Can we really be so sure that the kind of low-paid work made famous or infamous by a company like Sports Direct will no longer exist?
I don't think Mike Ashley is, moving into a post-work world or simply automating his mass factories in the East Midlands. Where is the evidence of this? We're seeing more and more degraded work, which we should be politically contesting, rather than seeing this as an inevitable transfer into the end of work.
That was John Cruddas, MP for Dagenham and Rainham, considered by many to be Labour's philosopher-in-chief. He sees this as dangerous territory for the party, a retreat from the site of the less historic struggle, the workplace.
But what I don't like are the propositions that underscore it, that have no bearing empirically in realities of the society we live in, have no bearing in terms of the future demand for labour, and they surrender a political contest around the character of work and the wage-labour relationship, if you want, and the sphere of production and the issues of ownership and power in society based on economic power. That is horrendous surrender of what the left is about at the same time.
But the unions who should be fighting that fight are in decline. They've got very low coverage in the private sector amongst younger workers.
I totally agree. And the left has not resolved the question of giving people genuine voice at work, so as to enact a more dignified workplace. But that does not mean you absolve yourself for trying to find the answers to this and embrace a form of futurology which owes more to Arthur C. Clarke than it does to Karl Marx. And that's my problem with it, where it comes from the radical left. They are not Marxist enough within this argument. And arguably, they are selling the past to the most fundamental neoliberal ideas. And that's why the idea is so attractive on the libertarian right. It imports a sort of passive citizenship with no sense of contribution. It doesn't contest the sphere of production, and it just retreats into a hyper-consumption.
So, have radical leftists like Nick Cernick just capitulated to capitalism?
I think to a certain sense, yes. But I think rather I'm recognizing the power of capitalism today to implement what it wants. I don't think the labour movement has a very strong hand at the moment. I think it's been weakened over the past 40 years by various governments, various legal measures, but also by capitalism moving businesses to China, to India, to other places. So capitalism has a lot of power. Businesses have a lot of power. Workers don't.
Isn't that quite defeatist?
I think it's realist.
Realist? Maybe we're seeing a new realignment, where radical lefties accept they can't do much about the power of big business, and free marketeers accept that the state must protect those that the market leaves behind. But how comfortable could these strange new bedfellows really be? Are there dangers for the left here? Sam Bowman from the Adam Smith Institute again.
I think that this is a much more free market idea than they realise, and my fear is that most kind of normal, sensible people in the centre will look at this, see the people on the hard left who support this, and be put off, be scared, because it seems like a kind of weird modern form of communism. It's not. It's a way of making the state much, much less invasive and much, much less powerful over people's lives.
To what extent do you think this idea is supported across the right here in Britain?
Well, another word or another term for the basic income is the negative income tax. It was proposed by Milton Friedman in the 70s. Richard Nixon almost brought it in until actually the Democrats blocked it, and instead they brought in a form of tax credits. And it's very, very similar to the basic income. There's quite widespread support for this on the right, certainly on the free market right.
Some on the economic right have even argued that a basic income could replace some aspects of the welfare state altogether. Its progressive advocates perhaps need to be live to the risk that the right could use a basic income to chip away at some of the left's hard-fought achievements like the NHS and labour market regulation. That's not the only danger for the left. The Brexit vote has highlighted the depth of the existential challenge Labour faces in reconnecting with its working-class voters, says John Cruddas.
Well, I think it's absolutely deadly. I mean, look, part of the thing about the basic income is that it assumes that the working class will disappear, right? That has always been an element in this futurology. Now, if we assume the working class will disappear, and it doesn't, we are just giving the biggest gift politically to UKIP that we could imagine.
So, wow, you think it could be a gift to UKIP, a universal basic income?
Oh, totally. I mean, because of the basic proposition that the working class have ceased to exist. Now, if you disrespect them to that degree, is it any wonder that they'll go walkabout, which they have been doing over the last 10 years anyway, and it's symptomatic of our inability to understand this system, that we can come to the conclusion that we think the universal basic income is the remedy. It is just a form of political madness to me.
So you think a universal basic income could sow the seeds for the destruction of the left?
Oh, totally. I mean, it surrenders its cause. So why should it not, therefore, see its ending?
This debate goes to the heart of the most important question facing progressive parties across the developed world. How should they respond to the fact that globalisation and technological progress have created winners and losers? In this programme, the left has offered two very different answers. I'm not quite convinced by either. On the one hand, embracing robots as a means to empower workers seems a bit naive. Surely technology strengthens the hands of those who own and program the robots, not the people who lose their jobs to them. I suspect if Karl Marx was alive, he'd be shouting about the ownership of the means of production. On the other hand, arguing that Labour should stick to the old fight doesn't really feel like an answer. Trade unions have been in decline for decades. Is that really going to change? But in the absence of any other answer to the question, maybe a basic income at least is worth a punt. Ed Miliband.
I think the important thing about this idea is it's an idea not for next week or next month, but it's an idea for 5, 10, 15 years ahead. And the case has got to be built. And I think it's pretty admirable that there are people building the case for it. I think it's got a chance, and I put it no higher than that, a chance of flying. But I think it deserves to be piloted. It deserves to be given a chance.
A universal basic income may not be the right answer, but maybe it's an answer to the right question.
Analysis was presented by Sonia Sodha and produced by Helen Grady. If you enjoyed this programme, why not subscribe to some other podcasts? Our new series, The Briefing Room, is in cracking form. I recommend it. Next week on Analysis, I'm delighted to welcome back the brilliant Alison Wolfe, and she'll be looking at what's really the motivation for politicians when they mess about with what goes on in the classroom.